In the Disney Plus show The Mandalorian, it is set 5 years after the fall of the Galactic Empire, and we are first introduced to the Mandalorian when he walks into a cantina on a very cold, desolate planet. And when he first walks in, he sees a bunch of guys roughing up and bullying some guy. And as soon as he enters the place, they turn their attention to him. He takes care of them pretty quickly and walks over to the guy that was being bullied, and he offers him money to buy himself a drink, but he puts down a bounty puck, and it's got the guy's face on it. He quickly tries to bargain with the Mandalorian, but the Mandalorian says, look, I can either take you in cold or warm, and he chooses warmth. The Mandalorian calls for a speeder to get back to his ship, and the last thing the captain of the speeder says is, watch out for the ice, and he should have heeded his own advice, because this huge beast bursts out of the ice and kills him. And then the beast turns his attention to the Mandalorian ship. The Mandalorian narrowly escapes after he zaps it, and he heads off to turn in his bounties. Now this guy that he just picked up will not shut up, and eventually he just asks to go to the bathroom, which the Mandalorian lets him do. But he starts snooping around, pretending he's going to the bathroom, and he's seeing all of the previous bounties frozen in the cryogenic chambers. And he gets a little freaked out, but when the Mandalorian catches him snooping around, he throws him in one of those cryogenic chambers and freezes him. He hands in all of his bounties to a guy named Grief Karga, and after he's done haggling with all the prices, he asks him, alright, what do you have? But everything that he has isn't really worth the time or the effort. The Mandalorian wants all of them, but he says, nah, I can't do that. I have other people I need to think about here. And the Mandalorian asks, why is it so slow? But he says, it's not slow, people just don't want to play guild rates. There is one job, however, that's going to pay pretty well, but it's under the table. And the Mandalorian says, great, where's the puck? But he says, there's no puck. You have to meet face to face with the guy. So the Mandalorian heads over to meet with this mystery man, and when he enters, there's the client protected by a bunch of stormtroopers. And to his left is a guy named Dr. Pershing. The client explains to the Mandalorian that he needs the asset alive, but if things go south, he is willing to take him dead. It's just going to be at a much lower fee. And Dr. Pershing jumps in and says, that's not what we agreed upon. Dr. Pershing wants this asset alive. And the client says, look, I'm just trying to be problematic about this. Unfortunately for the Mandalorian, he doesn't have much to go on though, because there is no bounty puck, and the only thing he knows about him is that he's 50 years old and then there's a tracking beacon. But the client says for a Mandalorian, this really shouldn't be a problem. And to motivate him, he gives him a down payment of a bar of Beskar steel and lets him know that there's more where that came from once the job is done. And Beskar steel is synonymous with the Mandalorian, although it's pretty hard to come by nowadays. So immediately when he gets this, he takes it to a Mandalorian blacksmith who right away knows that it was taken in the Great Purge. The blacksmith melts it down and gives him a piece of armor which he can add to his suit. But as she was melting it down, he was getting flashbacks of his childhood, having to run away as him and his family were attacked. Once he gets the armor though, those nasty thoughts go out of his head and he heads off to try to find this bounty. Once he arrives on the planet where the bounty is located though, he's immediately attacked by a herd of blurg. He's saved by a local farmer who asks if he's a bounty hunter, and the Mandalorian says yes, and he agrees to help him out. He tells him how he's helped other bounty hunters in the past out, but they've all died, and the Mandalorian says, well then why should I listen to your help? And he says, because you need it. I can lead you to their encampment. So the Mandalorian asks, alright, well then what's your cut? And the farmer says half. Initially the Mandalorian thinks that he means half the bounty, which is very steep, but he says, no, I mean half the blurg. We're gonna need one to ride there because I don't have a speeder, and I want the other one. And that's fine for the Mandalorian, but he doesn't really know how to ride blurg. And it takes him a little bit to learn how to ride the blurg, but he finally gets it down. When they arrive at the encampment, he tries to pay the farmer, but the farmer won't take it. He explains to the Mandalorian that this was a peaceful planet and those people have disrupted the peace. So at this point, he just wants whatever everybody's looking for off the planet so everybody can go back to their peaceful way of living. And because he's never met a Mandalorian, he felt inclined to help him because those are the best bounty hunters. So the Mandalorian thanks him and starts scoping out the turf and seeing how many people are there, but then he notices there's a bounty droid. And that's not the best thing to see at the moment, because the bounty droid is also looking for the same bounty that the Mandalorian's after. And after the bounty droid announces his arrival and takes some people out, the Mandalorian pops up and the bounty droid shoots at him until the Mandalorian shouts that he's in the guild as well, and they come to an understanding to actually work together and split this bounty. They're surrounded pretty quickly and are being attacked, but they've at least located the building which the bounty is in. The problem is there are a lot of people that are protecting the bounty, and they've just brought out a Gatling gun to take out the Mandalorian and the bounty droid. So the Mandalorian uses the bounty droid as a distraction and is able to get a hold of the Gatling gun and takes everybody out. Now, when they get inside, initially they can't find this bounty until they find a pod and open it up, and there is a baby Yoda. If there's a technical term for him, I apologize, but that's what everybody else is calling him, so you're gonna have to bear with me on that one. And initially, the Mandalorian can't figure out the big deal, but also doesn't think he has the right bounty because they said this thing was 50 years old. And the bounty droid reminds him that different species age at a different rate. Now, the bounty droid's orders were to kill on sight, whereas the Mandalorian's orders were to bring in Baby Yoda alive. And when the bounty droid is insisting on killing him, the Mandalorian takes him out, and now he has Baby Yoda all to himself. So in episode 2, the Mandalorian, along with Baby Yoda, are heading back to the Mandalorian ship when they're ambushed by a bunch of other bounty hunters. And the Mandalorian makes pretty quick work of them, but has noticed that everybody is going to kill Baby Yoda, whereas his orders were strictly to keep him alive. He patches himself up that night and they keep heading on to the ship, but when they get to the Mandalorian ship, they notice that a bunch of Jawas have taken it apart for scrap. The Mandalorian starts firing at them and they quickly get into their ship and take off, but the Mandalorian is on hot pursuit. He starts climbing up their ship as it's moving as they throw a bunch of different items down, trying to knock him off. But when he finally reaches the top, he's greeted by a bunch of Jawas who shoot at him, freeze him, and knock him off the ship. The Jawas have gotten away, so Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian head to the only other person he knows on the planet, the farmer. And the farmer lets him know that he's shocked that he's still alive, but also he's shocked that all of this fuss is about this little tiny creature. The Mandalorian explains what happened to his ship and is complaining about the fact that there's no real way to get his parts back, to which the farmer says, well, you could trade with them, I'll even take you there. But right out of the gate, the negotiations don't go all that great because the Mandalorian is pretty contentious. At first, they ask for his Beskar armor, which isn't on the table, and next they ask for Baby Yoda, which is also not on the table. The farmer asks, well, there must be something else you want, and they all start screaming, egg. Because they want the Mandalorian to go get the egg of a rhinoceros-like mudhorn, and that's not easy to do. And when the Mandalorian locates his cave, he heads in there and starts firing awesome shots, but he gets thrown out of it pretty quickly. And the Mandalorian is getting absolutely worked by this mudhorn. The mudhorn throws the Mandalorian down and then turns his attention to Baby Yoda, which narrowly escapes getting run over when the Mandalorian changes direction of the pod. The Mandalorian tries fire, but that doesn't work. He also tries wrangling the thing, but he just gets taken for a ride. It gets so bad at one point that the Mandalorian just gets on one knee, kind of accepting defeat with a dagger out, but all of a sudden, as the mudhorn is charging at him, he stops. And when the Mandalorian looks up, the mudhorn is moving his legs, but he's moving them above the ground. And the Mandalorian can't really figure out what's going on until he looks back at Baby Yoda, who is concentrating all of his energy at the mudhorn. And he had tried this the previous night when the Mandalorian was patching up his wounds, but the Mandalorian just figured that he was just being a baby, and he just kept putting him back into his pod. But all of his concentration takes a toll on the Yoda, who ends up passing out. Luckily, though, for the Mandalorian, when the mudhorn drops, he's able to stab it and kill it. He gets up and is looking at this passed out Yoda with absolute amazement at what he just did, but he came there to get an egg, and that's what he does. He barely makes it back to the Jawa ship on time because they were ready to leave, and gives them the egg, and he gets his stuff back. He tells the farmer he's shocked that he stayed, to which the farmer says, I'm shocked it took that long. And as they're heading back to the ship with all the stuff, the farmer asks if the child is still alive, which the Mandalorian says yes, and then he asks if the child is still hurt, which the Mandalorian says, I don't think so. He then wants the story again because it's just such a remarkable story he can't understand it, but the Mandalorian can't understand it himself. They spend a couple days trying to get the ship back together, and just as the Mandalorian's about to take off, he offers the farmer some money from the bounty because he thinks he deserves it, but the farmer says, thanks, but I can't accept that. He then asks the farmer to join his crew, saying that he can pay handsomely, but the farmer says, I've worked enough of my life to not have to work for anybody else. So the Mandalorian takes off in his ship, and as he does so, the child wakes up. In episode 3, as the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda are heading back, they get alert from Grief Cargo letting him know how excited the client is to receive the package. And as soon as he arrives on the planet, he heads on over to where the client is and hands on over the child. Dr. Pershing is very pleased because the child is very healthy, but the Mandalorian isn't pleased because he's wondering how many people had that tracking fob. So he asks the client lets him know, well, I needed to make sure I got the package. The client is true to his word and hands him a bunch of bars of Beskar as payment. But right before he leaves, he asks the client something very uncharacteristic. What are you going to do with the child? And since that question is against the guild, the client doesn't have to answer it, and he doesn't. He basically says, I gave you a hefty down payment, and then I just gave you a very substantial payment upon the job completion. So take your payment or take the answer, but you're not getting both. And the Mandalorian decides to take the payment. So he grabs the Beskar bars and heads on over to the Mandalorian blacksmith. And when he gets there, he explains to her that he wants a completely new suit. But she lets him know that a new suit is going to garner some unwanted attention, and he's already receiving it because other Mandalorians have shown up, and they're questioning why he has this Beskar that was taken by the Galactic Empire during the Purge. A fight ensues because they don't believe that he should be doing business with the same people that put the Mandalorians underground and into hiding, but the blacksmith reminds him that they're all fighting for the same side, they're all on the same team, and in a way, they're all brothers. So once the testosterone settles down, the blacksmith asks, how did your armor get so messed up? And he says, I was fighting a mudhorn. And she says, well, then the mudhorn will be your insignia. But the Mandalorian says, no, it won't, because I wasn't an honorable kill. I got help from my enemy. She asks, why did an enemy help you? And he says, well, the enemy didn't know he was my enemy at the time. So instead of the insignia, she says, fine. Instead, I will give you whistling birds, which is a weapon that is very powerful when you're surrounded by a lot of enemies, but unfortunately for him, he doesn't have a lot of them, so he has to use it wisely. And just like the last time, as the blacksmith is making the armor, he's remembering having to go into hiding when the Mandalorians were attacked during the Great Purge. But he gets decked out in his new armor and heads over to the cantina where Grief Karga and the rest of the bounty hunters are. And they are all staring at him, but it's not solely because of his new armor, it's because of sheer jealousy. The only one in the cantina that's happy for him is Grief Karga. And right away he asks how many of these people had tracking fobs, and he says all of them. That's why they're all pissed at you, because you got the biggest bounty of them all. But I'm not pissed at you, I'm happy for you. And one of the reasons why he's so happy for him is because he also got a bounty. He got a finder's fee for sending the Mandalorian over to the client, and he's got a couple of bars of Beskar. He tells the Mandalorian he should probably take a break, but the Mandalorian says, no, I want another job. And he gets a bounty puck of a rich person's son who jumped bail. But right as he's about to leave, he has two questions. Do you know what they're going to do with the child? And what is the Empire doing here? And Grief Karga doesn't know what they're going to do with the child because he's a part of the guild, and that's not an appropriate question. But also, he doesn't think the Empire is here because the Empire is no longer a thing. But tells him if it's really a concern to you, then go report it to the New Republic. But that's a joke, and he's not going to do it. So he gets in his ship and is about to head off, but then he sees that there's a knob missing on his console, and that knob was taken by the child. And guilt just gets to him, and he ends up hopping off the ship and tracking the child down. He heads on over to the building where he dropped off the child and sees that in the dumpster is the pod that was holding Baby Yoda. So then he camps out on a rooftop and is able to hear some of the conversation between the client and the doctor. And the client tells Dr. Pershing to extract the necessary materials as fast as possible and be done with it. But Dr. Pershing says they told us specifically to have the child alive. But the client says, you better finish your business quickly because I can no longer guarantee your safety. So the Mandalorian knows he has to act quickly and blows a hole in the wall and starts taking out stormtroopers on his way to the child. When he finally locates the child and the doctor is screaming for his life, saying, I protected the child, please don't kill me. But the Mandalorian wants to know what exactly he did to Baby Yoda. And it seems like Baby Yoda is going through all these diagnostic tests, but the doctor is telling him how Baby Yoda would have already been dead if it wasn't for the doctor. Please, don't kill me. But the next time he looks up, Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian are gone. As he's trying to exit the building, he gets surrounded by a bunch of stormtroopers, and that's when he uses the whistling birds. But unbeknownst to the Mandalorian, when he took Baby Yoda, all of those tracking fobs for the other bounty hunters started to go off, and now everybody in the town is looking for him. And it doesn't take long for them to surround him in the town square as he's heading to his ship. And those people include Grief Karga. Grief Karga lets him know, if you put down the package, I might let you go to your ship, but that's not an option for the Mandalorian. He then tells him, okay, well then go and drop off the package at the speeder over there, and we can talk about this. But instead of dropping off the child, he hops in the speeder and starts shooting his way out. He demands that the droid drive the speeder, and it seems to be going okay until Grief Karga shoots the droid, and the speeder is just stuck there. He's used up all of his bullets, he's used up all the fire, he's basically used up all of the options, and it seems like he's got nowhere else to go. That is, until all of the rest of the Mandalorians come to his defense. They're able to hold off all the other bounty hunters, and it allows the Mandalorian to get to his ship. But when he arrives there, Grief Karga is there, and he's holding the Mandalorian at gunpoint, saying, I didn't want to do this, but you broke the code. The Mandalorian then uses a smoke distraction and shoots Grief Karga. It doesn't kill him because the bullet hit one of those Beskar bars, but it does allow the Mandalorian to escape with the child. In episode 4, the Mandalorian is looking for a safe and quiet planet that he can just lay low with the child, and he finds a forest planet that's densely populated named Sorgan. And this place just seems like an ideal situation for what he's looking for. So the Mandalorian lands there and heads to a local restaurant where there's just one thing that doesn't seem quite right about it, and that's the person in the corner who just looks very out of place and very bounty hunterish. So when the owner comes over to get the Mandalorian's order, he tells her to bring some soup for the child, but also, do you know anything about that person over there? And she says, well, she arrived about a week ago, but other than that, not really. The next time he looks over, though, the woman is gone, so he pays the bartender to watch Baby Yoda and starts tracking her down. And it doesn't take long for her to pop up and the two get into a fight. This fight leads to a standstill, though, where they're both pointing their blasters at each other, and it's broken up when Baby Yoda comes out sipping on some soup. And that's when the Mandalorian invites her inside to have some of that soup. And she tells the Mandalorian her story that she's an ex-rebel turned mercenary named Cara Dune, but she arrived on the planet first, so the Mandalorian needs to kick rocks, unless they want to go in a round 2. So the Mandalorian obliges and heads back to his ship, and as he's working on it, he's approached by 2 farmers in the middle of the night. And they want to hire the Mandalorian because they were attacked by raiders the day before, and they're not the fighting type. They just really need some protection, but the Mandalorian isn't interested in it. Even though this little village is willing to give him all the money that they have, and it isn't until he overhears them say, great, we have to go back to the middle of nowhere, that he's interested. Because the middle of nowhere is exactly where he wants to be. But before he heads there with them, he wants to hire Cara. And she's hesitant to go, but he says the best case scenario is you're a deterrent, and the worst case scenario is you just tune up your blaster. But we're both looking for a quiet place, and this is it. And upon arrival, the village is thrilled to see them both. And there's one widow in the village in particular who is very happy to see the Mandalorian. She wants to shine his armor, if you know what I mean. She asks him when was the last time he took his armor off in front of people, and as he's looking at the children playing, he says, I was about their age. And that's pretty surprising to her, to which he goes on to explain that when the Mandalorians took him in after his parents were killed, he adopted their custom and their ways. And this is the way. So both the Mandalorian and Cara get settled in, and then they need to go out and scope out the territory. But what they find isn't great news, because there's an Imperial Walker's tracks, and that isn't what they signed up for. So they head back to the village and say, hey, we got some bad news, you guys are going to have to move. But the villagers don't want to do that, because they've lived there all their lives, and their ancestors have lived there all their lives, and they're not leaving. They beg and plead that there's got to be some other way, as Cara tells them, look, I've seen Imperial Walkers take out an entire village. But it becomes obvious to the Mandalorian that no matter what they say, they're going to stay. So the Mandalorian says, well, what if we teach them how to fight? So that's what they do in an awesome training montage. But they also write up a plan that they're going to dig a very, very deep trench and fill it with water to make it just look like a pond. They're going to lure the walker out, and when the walker steps foot in the pond, he's just going to sink down, and they're going to take him out. So the village is all trained, and the night comes to where they're going to lure the walker out, and the Mandalorian and Cara head into the woods to make some noise. And it works. They take out a couple of raiders, and it wakes up the walker. The walker chases them through the woods, but when it gets to the village, it doesn't step foot in the water. It just stays outside of it and starts firing on the village. And at this point, the other raiders have arrived, and a fight breaks out between the villagers and the raiders. And the Mandalorian and Cara are wondering why this thing just stopped, but two, how are we going to goad it into stepping forward? So Cara runs into the water where she can't be seen and is shooting at it, trying to goad it in further and further so that she's in the blasting range. And finally, it works. The walker steps foot in the water, drops like a stone, and keels over. The Mandalorian then jumps on top of it and is able to blow it up. And with the walker down and a lot of their men killed, the rest of the raiders just retreat. And this is a huge victory for the villagers. The Mandalorian and Cara stay in the village for about a week, but the Mandalorian says that word of their attack is going to spread, and it won't be long until more people come looking for both of them, so they should probably head out. And Cara says that's going to be tough to tell him that, meaning the child, because he's gotten really comfortable there. And the villagers don't want them to leave, especially that widow. She definitely doesn't want the Mandalorian to leave. And Cara asks, what happens if you take your armor off? And he says, nothing. I just can't put it back on. So let me get this straight. You could settle down with that hot widow and live a good life with your child, but instead, you're not going to do that. And he goes, no, I'm not. But what I am going to do is leave him here, because a life on the road is no life at all. And he's comfortable here, and he can have a good life. The Mandalorian then heads over to the widow and is explaining how the child is comfortable here and he wants to keep the child here. And as she's trying to convince the Mandalorian to stay, there's a bounty hunter in the woods that has his sights set on the child. Luckily for Baby Yoda, though, Cara has gotten to him first and shoots him. But now they know that the bounty hunters are just going to keep coming for the child, so unfortunately, they can't stay there, and the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda take off. In episode 5, while he's flying through the galaxy, the Mandalorian gets into a shootout with another bounty hunter, and he's able to win, but the fight wrecks his ship and he needs to land at the closest planet and get it fixed. So he heads on over to a mechanic, who lets him know that because of the damage, it's going to cost a lot. And on top of it, he doesn't want droids working on his ship, which is going to cost even more. And he has some of it, but he doesn't have all of it. So he heads off into town to try to find a job, and he leaves the child in the ship. But eventually the child gets bored and comes out, to which the mechanic agrees to watch the kid, thinking, all right, well, I'll just charge the Mandalorian a babysitting fee as well. The Mandalorian makes his way over to a bar where he's told by the bartender droid that they don't have any bounty hunting work for the guild on the planet. And that's when a bounty hunter named Toro speaks up and says, well, if you're looking for work, I have it over here. He shows him a bounty puck of somebody named Fennec Sham who he needs to track down. Fennec Sham is an assassin, and Toro has tracked the bounty fob here on this planet, and it seems like she's heading out to the dunes and he could use some help. But the Mandalorian says, yeah, good luck with that, and starts walking off. And Toro says, I thought you needed a job. The Mandalorian says, how long have you even been in the guild? He says, long enough? And the Mandalorian says, well, obviously not, because Fennec Sham is an elite mercenary, so good luck with that. And that's when Toro comes clean. Look, man, I'm actually not in the guild, and this is my first bounty hunting job, and I need this job to get in the guild. So I'll even let you keep the entire bounty, which is a lot. I just want credit for bringing her in so I can get into the guild. And this is partly because the Mandalorian feels bad for the kid, but mostly because he needs the money, that he agrees and says, okay, meet me over at the garage with 2 bikes and we'll head out. So the Mandalorian heads back to the garage to get some supplies from his ship and sees that the mechanic is now taking care of Baby Yoda, which he's fine with. And he meets Toro outside and they head off to the dunes. And the first group that they encounter are a group of Tusken Raiders, which they bargain with to get some safe passage. And they don't come across anybody else until they see a body being dragged by a dewback. And they don't know if the dewback is dragging the body of Fennec Sham, so the Mandalorian heads down to take a look. But it's not. It's just another bounty hunter. And when he lets Toro know that, all of a sudden he's shot out by a sniper who is Fennec Sham. Sham. And since Fennec Sham has the high ground, they just camp out that night and wait for nightfall to make their move. And as soon as nightfall hits, they head as fast as possible on their speeders towards Fennec Sham, every once in a while shooting off a blinding light that won't allow her to get them in her sights. And then it works for a while until she is able to get one shot off that cripples the Mandalorian speeder. And as she has the Mandalorian dead to rights in her sights, that's when Toro shows up saying, "Not so fast." But she's an elite mercenary, and her and Toro get into a fight, but it doesn't end well for Toro. And right as she has him in a chokehold, that's when the Mandalorian shows up, and she knows the jig is up. But the issue is, they only have one bike, and 3 people can't fit on one bike. So the Mandalorian tells Toro, "Go find that dewback and bring it back." But Toro says, "I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to leave you here with my bounty and my bike." So with no other choice, the Mandalorian says, "All right, stay here. Don't let her near the bike. And remember, she's no good to us dead." And shortly after the Mandalorian leaves, Fennec tries to start manipulating Toro. At first, she starts with, "I'll pay you double what you'll make," but the money isn't the issue with him. It's getting in the guild. And then she tells him, "Well, the Mandalorian's armor is worth more than me." And he says, once again, the money's not the issue. Bring in a legend like you, that gets me into the guild. She says, "Well, if you want a legend, the most hunted man by the guild right now is that Mandalorian, because he took out a bunch of guild members with a special package. So if you bring them him, you'll be a legend with the guild, and I can help you with that." But instead of letting her go, he shoots her, saying, "As soon as I would have let you go, I would have been dead." And then he heads off back into town. And when the Mandalorian shows back up on the dewback, he sees the dead body of Fennec Sham, and he knows something's gone wrong. So he also heads back to the garage. And that's where he sees Toro, who has the mechanic and Baby Yoda at gunpoint. But Toro's not so good at this bounty hunting thing, and the Mandalorian throws up one of those blinding lights and is able to shoot Toro. He pays off the mechanic with whatever was in Toro's pockets and heads off. But there was somebody else there, and they have located the body of Fennec Sham. In episode 6, the Mandalorian needs a job, but since he's not seeing eye to eye with the guild, he has to go to the underground to do so. And he meets up with a guy named Ran, who he used to run with back in the day. And Ran is thrilled to see him, but Ran is also aware of why he's there, because of the fact that he had a fight with guild members, and he had to reluctantly show up to Ran's doorstep looking for work. So Ran lets him know that he has a 5-person job, but only has 4 people. One of Ran's associates pissed off a competitor and got caught, and they need to spring him. But the big reason why he hired the Mandalorian isn't just because he's an incredible warrior, it's because he needs a ship. Even though that wasn't part of the deal, and the Mandalorian is not happy about it. And the reason they need the ship is because it's off the Old Imperial and the New Republic's grid, so it's basically a ghost. He's introduced the crew he'll be working with, and they all have a particular set of skills. There's Mayfield, who'll be running point on this, and he's a sharpshooter. Berg, who's basically the muscle in this situation. A droid pilot named Zero, and the Mandalorian hates droids. And then there's Xi'an, who's a knife expert, and her and the Mandalorian have a past. And they all get together and go through the mission to break into a New Republic prison. And the Mandalorian immediately says, "Wait, your guy wasn't taken by a rival syndicate. He was arrested. This isn't what I signed up for. I don't want this kind of heat." But it's not like they want the heat either. And they say, "Well, if we don't mess up, there won't be any heat." And on top of it, the ship is controlled by droids. And we all know how much you hate droids. And since a job's a job and he needs the money, he reluctantly gets on the ship. And as they're flying to the New Republic prison, the group is questioning the Mandalorian about his helmet and why he doesn't take it off. It leads to a fight between him and Berg accidentally presses a button that opens up a closet to where the child was hiding. And they're all kind of enamored with the child, asking, "What is it? Is it a pet?" And the Mandalorian is trying to divert their attention from the child to something else. But luckily for the child, they've arrived at the New Republic prison. They go to work with the droid leading them to where they're supposed to go, and everything's going swimmingly until Berg basically takes out, the best way I can describe it is a Roomba. But when he takes it out, it alerts the guards, and now they're in a firefight. And it seems like they're pinned down until the Mandalorian goes around the guards and ends up taking them all out by himself. They make their way to the control room where there's a human there, and the Mandalorian says, "I thought there were supposed to be only droids on this ship," so he's once again pissed off at this mission. And the soldier in the control room has a gun pointed at them, but he's outnumbered 4-1 and he knows it. So as Mayfield looks to try to find out what cell the person is located in, the guy in the control room pulls out a tracking device that'll alert a New Republic attack team to the signal. So Mayfield immediately starts to threaten to kill the guy, but the Mandalorian says, "We're not killing anybody." And the Mandalorian now has guns pointed at not just Mayfield, but Berg as well, and everybody's kind of at a standstill, until finally Xi'an throws a knife at him and kills him. But when she did so, he let go of the tracking beacon, and there's going to be a New Republic attack team on their ass in about 20 minutes, which should be plenty of time to get the asset and get out. And when they get to the cell, they break out Xi'an's brother, a guy named Quinn, who also knows the Mandalorian, and they have a past. But as soon as they break him out, they throw the Mandalorian in the cell and trap him in there. And it doesn't take long for the Mandalorian to bust out using a prison guard's arm. But instead of heading back to his ship, he heads to the main control room and separates the group by closing down hallways. When he does this, Zero, the droid pilot, loses communication with his group, and now they're in that prison blind. And the group is separated into two groups. The first is Quinn and Mayfield, and the second is Xi'an and Berg. And Xi'an and Berg go out to try to get the Mandalorian and take him out, while Quinn tells Mayfield, just get me off of this ship. I don't care about my sister, but I'll make sure you get triple what you were supposed to. But one by one, the Mandalorian is able to take out the entire group until finally it's just him and Quinn. And Quinn says, wait, you were hired to do a job, so do the job and get me out of here. And the Mandalorian knows he's correct, so they get back on the ship, and it's perfect timing. Because Baby Yoda popped his head out, and that droid saw him and has been hunting him ever since. And now the droid has Baby Yoda dead to rights, but the Mandalorian shoots him. The Mandalorian delivers Quinn to Rand, and Rand asks what happened to the others, but the Mandalorian says, you weren't supposed to ask questions, and Rand says, you're right, and pays him. But as soon as he leaves, Rand says, kill him. And a gunship gets ready to take off. But the Mandalorian was smart and hid that tracking beacon in Quinn's pocket. And shortly after he takes off, a New Republic attack team shows up looking for the tracking beacon and ends up blowing up the space station before Rand's ship can take off to kill the Mandalorian. In episode 7, as he's flying through the galaxy, the Mandalorian gets a message from Grief Karga saying that things have changed. The client, being obsessed with getting the child back, has overtaken the city with Imperial guards. And if the Mandalorian is willing to come back and do one last mission and kill the client, Grief Karga is willing to let him keep the child and scrap his record and make things right with the guild. But before he heads back to Navarro, he heads to Sorgan to get some backup. He's able to convince Kara to come along with him after saying that the city has been overtaken by Imperials, and the two set off for Navarro. And while flying there, he's explaining to Kara how the child will never be safe until they take out the client. And even though he knows he could be walking into an ambush, he doesn't really have a choice. But then all of a sudden, the ship starts flying crazy, and when they go upstairs to the pilot's seat, they find Baby Yoda there controlling the ship. And once they get the ship back under control, Kara says, do you have anybody that can take care of him? And in fact, he does. So he heads back to meet with the farmer. And after the initial pleasantries that they exchange, with the farmer saying that he used to actually fight against Kara's squad, but he bought his freedom and now lives peacefully, the bounty hunting droid that was working with the Mandalorian in episode 2 shows up, offering them tea. And immediately the Mandalorian wants to kill him. But the farmer, who we learn in this episode's name is Quill, says, no, wait, I reprogrammed him. Because after you destroyed all of them, I went and picked up the pieces. And it took me a while to reprogram him and train him, but basically now he's nothing more than a butler, although he is trained to defend. But you can tell, even with this explanation, the Mandalorian still does not trust this droid at all. But he does trust Quill and tries to hire him to protect the child. But Quill is only willing to do so if the droid can come along with his blurg. And since the Mandalorian doesn't really have any bargaining room, he reluctantly agrees. So the Mandalorian, Kara, IG-11, Quill, the blurg, and the child all head to Navarro. And as they're heading to Navarro, the Mandalorian and Kara are engaged in an arm wrestling contest. But when the child sees this, he thinks that the Mandalorian is in danger and uses the Force to start choking Kara, which freaks her out. She says that's not okay. But they all see the power of the child, and Quill says, now your story about the Mudhorn makes even more sense. When they arrive on Navarro, they're greeted by Grief Karga and 2 other bounty hunters. He explains how the town is now overrun by ex-Imperials, and he says that he should probably have Kara watch the ship, but the Mandalorian says, no, she's coming with us. Grief tells him that they'll camp out and wait for sunrise, and when that happens, they'll head into town and kill the client. And as they make camp for the night, Grief Karga goes over their plan. Grief and the Mandalorian will head into the house with the client. They'll use the child as bait to do so, and when they're joined at the table with the client, the Mandalorian will shoot him, and that'll be it. And since all of his reinforcements are ex-Empire, once they lose their paychecks, they're not going to fight. But the Mandalorian says, yeah, but what if they do? He says, okay, well, hypothetically, if they do, then we have 2 bounty hunters and Kara over there who will take them out. And right as he says that nothing can go wrong, they're attacked by Daenerys Targaryen's dragons. I mean, all 3 of them start attacking the group. And after the group is able to fight them off, they notice that Grief Karga is injured pretty badly. And as they try to figure out how to heal them, the child comes over, touches them, uses the Force, and heals them. And that's when they all realize more and more how much power the child actually has. The next day, though, they wake up and they head to the outskirts of the town, and Grief says, well, I guess this is it, and turns around and shoots his other bodyguards and comes clean. He tells Kara and the Mandalorian and Quill that the plan originally was to kill them and take the child, because the client is offering a massive bounty for him. But after the child saved his life, he just can't bring himself to do so. So if the Mandalorian wants to kill him, that's fine, but he thinks he has a better idea, because that child is never going to be safe as long as the client is there. So Grief wants to help him go down there into the town and kill the client. And as Kara is trying to convince him, no, it's not worth it, just kill Grief right here, the Mandalorian knows that he's right. The child is never going to be safe as long as the client is alive. So the Mandalorian comes up with a plan, that they're going to act like the Mandalorian was caught by Kara. Grief is going to get him into the town. They're going to use Baby Yoda's pod as bait, while Quill actually takes Baby Yoda back to the ship. And once he arrives there, he's going to set a protocol that won't allow anybody inside the ship. But once they're walking through town, they realize how many stormtroopers actually are in the town. And Kara, who is hesitant about this plan to begin with, is even more so. But once they actually get into the building where the client is, Grief Kargo's words rang true. There's only 4 stormtroopers. And they sit down with the client, and the client is just waxing poetic about how great the Empire is and how the New Republic hasn't done a great job. And he gets a message from a guy named Moff Gideon, who asks him if he has the child, which the client says yes, he's sleeping at the moment. He actually hasn't seen him. And Moff says, well, look again. And then all of a sudden, their building that they're in is shot up by death troopers. The Mandalorian radios to Quill immediately saying, we're bunkered down, get to the ship immediately. But when he sends that transmission, it's overheard by 2 stormtroopers who head off on bikes. Moff Gideon arrives a short time later via a TIE fighter and starts addressing them, telling them that they have no idea what they actually have, but it'll be his soon. And the whole time, the Mandalorian is frantically trying to get in touch with Quill. But unfortunately, those stormtroopers caught up with Quill, killed him, and grabbed the child. Episode 8 picks up right where Episode 7 left off. The 2 stormtroopers that picked up Baby Yoda are sitting outside of the city waiting orders that they can come in. And as they're really just screwing around, IG-11 shows up because it's programmed to protect the child. The droid takes out both stormtroopers and grabs Baby Yoda and hops on one of the speeder bikes, but instead of heading back to the ship, it heads back into town because it's programmed to protect. And in the town, the group is surrounded and they try to escape through the sewers, but to no avail. And Moff Gideon makes mention that the group is desperate. And in fact, they are, because the Imperials just set up a cannon. And Kara is all too familiar with the dangers of this thing. Moff Gideon starts to address them personally, saying if anybody knows the dangers of this cannon, it is Kara. But she only saw the destruction of the cannon's predecessor, and this is the new version. Then he calls the Mandalorian by his real name, Din Djarin, and then he asks Grief Kargo to put down his weapons. And in doing all of this, he's proving that he knows everything about the people that are inside. So Grief is actually entertaining this idea to lay down his arms and ask, can we trust you? And he says, no, you can't. In fact, I would love nothing more than to double cross you guys. You broke our pact. But as of right now, it's in my best interest to keep you guys alive. So until that changes, I'm going to allow you guys to come out. And I'll give you till nightfall to figure out if you want to do that or if you want to get blown up by this cannon. And as they're discussing their options, the Mandalorian makes mention that he knows who it is. It's Moff Gideon. But Kara makes mention that Moff Gideon was supposed to be killed for war crimes. And the Mandalorian knows it's Moff Gideon because when he was a child, his parents were killed by droids. But before his parents were killed, he was hidden. And right as a droid was about to kill him, a Mandalorian saved his life. And this is probably why he has a serious distrust of droids. But when he became of age, he swore into the creed of the Mandalorian. And at the time of the Great Purge, Moff Gideon was an ISB officer. And the only place that had record of his actual name was on Mandor, and Moff Gideon would have had that information. But the good news is, they haven't captured the child yet because he says that they need him. And when the Mandalorian tries to get in touch with Quill, he's unable to do so, but he does get in touch with IG-11. And IG-11 is coming in hot to save their ass. He takes out a couple of stormtroopers outside of the village and is able to meet up in the town square and starts firing at everybody he sees, which allows the group to exit the building. They start putting up a really good fight and giving the Imperials everything that they can handle until the Mandalorian is down when Moff Gideon has him in his sights, but instead of shooting him, he decides to shoot something next to him that blows up and flies the Mandalorian backwards. It knocks him out, and the group has to regroup inside of the house to figure out their next play. The IG goes to work trying to open up that sewer gate so they can escape via the sewers. And Kara is trying to tell the Mandalorian that it'll be alright, but he's saying it won't be. You gotta leave without me. And he's bleeding from the head pretty profusely. The Mandalorian says, make sure the child's safe. It's too late for me. He gives her a medallion and says, when you get to the Mandalorian covert, show them the medallion. Tell him it's from Din Djarin. And tell him that the child was in his protection and they will help you. But she's still not giving up on trying to save his life, even though it seems like he has accepted defeat. And as they're having this conversation, a stormtrooper armed with a flamethrower starts lighting up the building. He starts setting the building on fire outside, but then goes to set them on fire inside. Luckily, though, when he goes to set them ablaze, the child uses the Force to take that fire, stop it in midair, and throw it back at the stormtrooper, killing him. IG-11 gives Kara the child, saying, protects the child, I will take care of the Mandalorian, escape via the sewers, and Grief Kargo, the child, and Kara do so. So now it's just IG-11 and the droid-hating Mandalorian. And the Mandalorian tells him, alright, get it over with, kill me. But he says, no, I've been reprogrammed. I'm a nurse bot now. But I'm gonna have to take your helmet off to fix you. And he says, no, I can't do that. No living thing has ever seen me with my helmet off since I put it on. But the droid reminds him, I'm not a living thing, and takes it off. He sprays his head with some healing spray and gets him down into the sewers. And the group meets up with Kara, Grief, and the kid. They start trying to find their way out of the sewers, and the Mandalorian wants to meet up with the other Mandalorians hiding in the sewers because he wants them to help them escape the town. But when they come up to the area where the Mandalorians hide, he finds nothing but the remnants of their armor. Immediately, he starts blaming Grief Kargo, demanding to know if he did it. Even though Grief is adamant that he did not, it just seems like the Mandalorian is convinced that it actually was Grief Kargo or his people. Until finally, the Mandalorian blacksmith pops up from the shadows and says, he didn't do it. When we came out of hiding, we knew this could be a possibility. The Mandalorian asks if she will come with them, and she says, no, I'm not going to abandon this place until I've salvaged all of what's left. When she lays eyes on the child, she says it looks helpless, and the Mandalorian says it's not helpless, it's just injured at the moment. Believe it or not, he can actually move things with his mind, and she's heard of this because she knows about the Jedi. She tells the Mandalorian the stories of the Jedi, and the Mandalorian asks if they're enemies, to which he says no. Well, it's kind we're enemies, but this one right here is not. And by creed, it's now in your care. He says, well, am I supposed to train him? She says, no, it's too weak, it'll die. But it would be a good idea to reunite it with its own kind. The Mandalorian, though, has no interest in just trying to comb the galaxy to figure out where Baby Yoda came from. Now, while they're discussing the child, Cara wants to get the hell out of there, and the blacksmith says if you just follow that path right there, it'll lead you to a river of lava. The Mandalorian wants to stay with the blacksmith, but she says you can't, because that child is in your care, and until it's of age or it's reunited with its own kind, you're its father. And right before the Mandalorian leaves with the group, she gives him his signet. He is now a part of a clan of 2. She also gives him a jetpack, which he had been looking for, although he doesn't know how to really use it quite yet. So the group heads off to the river of lava, and not long after, a bunch of stormtroopers show up, asking a bunch of questions to the blacksmith. But she's a Mandalorian, and she takes them out with ease. The group has discovered not only a river of lava, but also a boat with a droid as a captain. And the droid starts steering the ship down the river, and it seems like the group is home free. Until that is, the Mandalorian uses his infrared abilities and sees that they're actually floating into a trap of a bunch of stormtroopers. IG-11 makes mention that he cannot be captured. Even though he's been reprogrammed, he's still going to have to self-destruct before being caught by the enemy. But the Mandalorian says, no, you can't. We're going to fight our way out of this. But he says, no, there's no way out of this. But if you agree to protect the child, I probably can get us out of here because I will use myself as a sacrifice. And even though the Mandalorian pleads with him not to do it, IG-11 hops in the lava, slowly crawling towards the group of stormtroopers. And as they're all kind of looking at him confused, he self-destructs and kills all of them. So the group comes out of the tunnel, and it seems like they're scot-free, but Moff Gideon has hopped in his TIE fighter and is coming right at them. And they realize they're not going to be able to take him out with just their blasters. So the Mandalorian puts on that jetpack and is able to hop on one of the wings of the TIE fighter. He puts a bomb on the wing, hops off of it, and it explodes, and Moff Gideon's TIE fighter goes crashing to the ground. Now that they've cleared the town of all the stormtroopers and the Imperials, Grief Karga asks them if they will stay. He wants to hire Cara, but she says, my record's not too clean. He says, don't worry about that. I'll wipe it all clean. But the Mandalorian isn't staying because he has to take care of the child. So he gets back to the ship, makes a little makeshift grave for Quill, and then the Mandalorian and the child get ready to head off. But right before he leaves, he noticed that there's something around the child's neck, and it's that medallion that he gave Cara to give to the Mandalorians when he thought he was going to die. He tells the child to keep it, and they fly off together. But the season doesn't end there because Moff Gideon has survived the crash, cuts his way out of the TIE fighter, and is going to be looking for the child and vengeance. And that is how Season 1 of The Mandalorian ends. Please subscribe to this channel. It's only one button. It would be really cool if you clicked it. Hit the thumbs up button if you like this video, and hit the thumbs down button if you thought this video absolutely sucked, because I probably at one point said Moof Gideon instead of Moff Gideon. If you know somebody that needs a recap of The Mandalorian, please hit the share button. It's there for a reason. And if you say something in the comment section and I don't respond, don't take it personally. I just avoid the comment sections because they usually just make me feel bad, and I'm a sensitive guy. But thank you so much for watching.